Okay, first of all, so this is the fourth multiple choice review section. Yes, on the third multiple choice review video, we did this question here. It says, what's the I don't know what it says. It's a bad question. And I kind of hesitated and stumbled through it, and I was like, it's got to be 42. That number right there has to be less, and it can't be more, it can't be 0. It's not 42, it's 50. This is a bad question. I don't know what they thought they were doing, but it's 50. There's a and I say on the other video, my instinct wants it to be 50, because if it goes from 100 to 200, it's got to go from 50 to 100. 50, that's a bad question. I felt bad for giving you the wrong answer. It's 50. It's not on the right answer tree. The right answer is not there. All right, and then we left off yesterday on question 12 on section 3, and we were saying that the answer, well, we were just sort of pretending yesterday that it said investment. Not worry about the investment demand curve, because that's not something I emphasize. I just said, what happens to investment? When will it increase? This says shift to the right. We're going to say, when will it increase? And basically, if the interest rate falls, right? And so you might have put E, in which case, good job. You knew that, you know a really important fact. Now, they actually want the answer to be C, because that would also cause more investment. If businesses felt more optimistic about the future, they would be more likely to invest, to buy more capital. All right, so what's the difference? Well, because they're actually asking about a model. When I do monetary policy, I do the money market. I do this relationship here that I just drew, and then I do aggregate demand, aggregate supply. Some people in the middle put what's called the investment demand curve, which has interest rate here, quantity of investment here. You can just say investment. And it's a downward sloping relationship, the investment demand curve. All right? It just illustrates the idea that when the interest rate goes up, investment goes down. When the interest rate goes down, investment goes up. It illustrates my tattoo I claim to have in graph form. But so the reason this has two possible answers here is they're asking which would shift the curve to the right. And obviously, a change in interest rate wouldn't shift the curve. A decrease in interest rates would move along this curve to the right, because it's on an axis. It would shift if businesses became more confident. So this is not a graph that I emphasize. That's why I wanted to say that either choice would have been good for you to put. Let's go to the next one. All right, 13 says automatic stabilizers in the economy. So this is the questions about how, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So before we answer this, let's think about what discretionary stabilizers are. Stabilizers that aren't automatic, where Congress would take action to stabilize the economy. If Congress is going to take action to stabilize an economy, it would either be because I always like to draw full employment GDP to give me a reference point, so the grader knows there's aggregate supply, right? I like to draw aggregate supply and then lay aggregate demand on top of it. Well, the grader will know what the situation is. If full employment's right there and I draw aggregate demand down here, it's got to be a recession. If they wanted to stabilize that, they would want to increase aggregate demand. Well, how do you do that if you're Congress? You either raise government spending, which is a direct component of aggregate demand. C equals I plus G plus X of N, there it is. Or you lower taxes. That gives people more disposable income, which causes them to spend more of their own money. So that's a component of aggregate demand. All right? So those aren't automatic. Congress has to act there. Those are called discretionary measures, discretionary fiscal policy. And then, of course, if you put your... sorry, I always draw aggregate supply first, so I can put full employment, so then I can put aggregate demand where I want it. I can lay aggregate demand on top of it. If they wanted to stabilize this inflation, they'd want to move aggregate demand to the left, and they would do so by cutting government spending or raising taxes. Well, those would be discretionary. But there are actually some elements of our economy that stabilize either the top graph recession or the bottom graph inflation automatically without Congress acting. And remember, these are called they're called automatic, they're called built-in, they're called non-discretionary because they happen on their own with nobody exercising any discretion. All right? And so let's see, which ones are automatic? Actually, a progressive income tax is automatic. The idea is That's the income tax that taxes you at a greater percentage as you get richer. So the idea is, for example, if there was too much agri-demand, if there was inflation, people would be getting richer. And a progressive income tax would cause them to get taxed more. And that would be higher taxes and decrease agri-demand. It would stabilize the inflation. If there was a recession and people were getting poor, they'd be taxed less, and lower taxes during a recession helps with the recession. It's automatic. So 1 is an automatic stabilizer, progressive income tax. If you're shaking your foot or doing that right there, you shake the camera. There we go. Unemployment compensation, that's kind of the opposite, and that works the same way. During recessions, more people are unemployed, the government pays out more unemployment checks, and that stimulates agri-demand. It helps with the recession, stabilize the recession. During inflationary periods, less people need unemployment because agri-demand is so far to the right, so they hand out less checks, and that when they hand out less checks, that is contractionary, and that causes agri-demand to move to the left. So actually, government transfers like unemployment payments are also an automatic stabilizer. So 1 and 2 have to be part of the answer. So it can't be 3. It has to have 1 and 2 both in it. So it's got to be D. I don't even have to read number 3. Number 3 says congressional action that increases tax rates. What's wrong with that? Well, that's not automatic. That's discretionary. That's Congress acting deliberately. All right, let's go to 14. All right, in order to be automatic or built in, which of the following must taxes automatically do in recessionary periods and in inflationary periods? What do you want taxes to do during recessions? Do you want to tax people more? If you want to tax them less, so they'll have more money to spend. So you want to tax people less during recessions. It's got to be one of those two. Can't be those. And then during inflationary periods, you want to tax people more, so they'll have less money to spend. They'll stop spending so much. So, B. If you're using Keynesian policy. Some economists would say don't tax them more ever, but there we go. All right, the next question is about the balanced budget multiplier. All right, and this is a very advanced topic, and I'm not going to go through the math of why it works, but once you understand it, it's very easy. It's the idea that if the government were to maintain a balanced budget, if they have some kind of requirement, they don't in real life, but if they did want to keep the budget balanced. By the way, is our budget currently balanced? Government spending equals taxes. Government spending is money going out from the government. That's their money coming in. Is it currently balanced? Currently, we have more money going out than coming in. What's that called? That's a budget deficit. And then if you had less money going out than coming in, so the government ends up with extra. It's called a surplus, a budget surplus. That's different than a trade deficit or a trade surplus. We'll get to that in a later video. All right. Well, but if they did want to keep a balanced budget, any say increase in government spending, they'd have to have an equal increase in taxes to keep everything balanced. So let's say those were both 17 billion. The question is, what would happen to GDP? All right, well, what is this? Is this expansionary or contractionary? Expansionary. So that would cause more GDP. How much? We'd need the multiplier, we need the MPC. We don't have that information. All right? Raising taxes, is that expansionary or contractionary? That's contractionary. That would lower GDP. So the question is, which one wins and by how much? Which one's more direct and more powerful? Which one has a direct effect on aggregate demand? And which one works through consumers? Government spending has a direct effect on aggregate demand. It is all multiplied. Taxation doesn't all get multiplied, because when you tax somebody, the first thing they do is they say, well, am I going to account for these higher taxes by cutting back on my spending? Well, that would all get multiplied. Or cutting back on my savings, in which case the multiplier wouldn't work on that change. So government spending is more direct, it's more powerful. So I guess GDP is going to go up by some small amount. How much? Well, no matter what the MPC is, and no matter what the multiplier is, the balanced budget multiplier is always 1. Meaning, if both of these go up by 17, GDP, I guess GDP will go up because government spending wins. GDP will go up by 17. If both of them go down by 11, GDP will go down by 11. If both of them go down by 36.2, GDP will go down by 36.2. That's the idea of the balanced budget multiplier. It's always 1. So Let me see what the answer is. Equal increases in government spending and taxation will make a recession worse. That would actually help with a recession, because the expansionary government spending would win. Equal increases in government spending and taxation will increase total spending. That's true. Okay. I don't know if that's a description of the balanced budget multiplier, but that's the truest thing I've seen so far. Government spending, government deficits might have a contractionary impact on the economy. Government deficits are actually expansionary. Think about it. More government spending or less taxation, that leads to a deficit, right? That leads to government spending exceeds taxation. That's expansionary. Doesn't sound very expansionary for the government. We don't care about the government. We care about the economy. The government runs a deficit. They're pumping more into the economy. That's why they have the deficit. Supply will necessarily create its own demand. That is a statement of Say's law, which we don't know and don't care about. And the level of gross domestic product is never less than the level of disposable income. That's not true. So it's got to be B. All right. Let's keep going. All right. In which of the following ways will increases in short-run aggregate supply change the price level and unemployment? Oh, okay, cool. Just got to draw a little picture, right? If they don't say short run or long run, what do you assume? So short run, aggregate supply. They said it, so I wrote short run. If they didn't say it, I'd still draw it the same and write aggregate supply. Here's QF. And they didn't really tell me if we were in a recession, inflation, or at full employment, so I'll just put us in the middle at full employment. They said an increase in short run aggregate supply. What would that do? Well, the picture's going to tell me the answer. That's awesome. Here's the old one. Here's the new one. What happened to price level? Decrease, so it's got to be B or C or D. And then what happened to GDP? It increased, but they didn't ask me about GDP. They asked me about unemployment. So what happened to unemployment? With more GDP, unemployment actually goes down. So I need both of them to go down here. Decrease and decrease. B. All right. 17. Assume the aggregate supply curve is upward sloping. All right. And the economy is in a recession. If the government increases both taxes and government spending by $25 billion, oh, all right, wait. What is an increase in taxes? Is that expansionary or contractionary? That's contractionary. You don't want that during a recession, but that's what just happened. Okay. Oh, but government spending increases. That's expansionary. Which one wins? Government spending wins, so there is going to be expansion. Aggregate demand is not going to lurch way to the right, but is going to move to the right because the government spending is going to win by a little bit. All right, how much is it going to win by? 25 billion. The balanced budget multiplier is 1. If they both go up by 25, GDP is going to go up by 25. So I know that that's going to be expansionary, and a quick sketch of aggregate supply and aggregate demand will tell me what happens to price level and GDP with expansion. What happens to both? Price level goes up, GDP goes up. So I got increase. A. Let's go to the next one. Being able to draw aggregate supply and aggregate demand and label it is a huge portion of the test. Maybe even half. And then, of course, know how to move the curves. Okay, we intentionally skipped 18, 19, and 20 because they were about a topic that's no longer on the AP test. Which of the following fiscal policy actions would be most effective in combating a recession? All right, I love it. So, combating a recession means expansion. So I'm going to need lowering taxes, that's expansionary. And I need raising government spending, that's expansionary. So, I need lowering taxes, and I need raising government spending. What's the only one with both? B. Alright. I haven't gotten a monetary policy on this one yet. I think it's in Unit 4. If the primary goal is to reduce inflation, which fiscal policy action would be appropriate? During a period of rapidly rising consumer price index. What is during a period of rapidly increasing consumer price index code for? What do we call it when the price index is going way up? Inflation. So that's just another way for this question to say, there's lots of inflation. What do you do with government spending and taxation? Could you cut government spending? That's contractionary. That would help with the inflation. I like 1. So I'm going to eliminate anything without a 1 in it. Down to 2 answers already. Increase transfer payments to those most severely affected by the rising price index. When I was working these questions yesterday, I was like, ooh, I don't think so. But that one's a little vague. I'm not certain, ready to go about that one. I don't like it, but maybe. And I was like, oh no. Why wasn't I that worried about it though? It's not in A or in D. It has to be wrong. And by the way, typically the people most affected by problems with the economy are the poor. And if you give them more money, if you increase transfer payments to the poor, they'll go spend it. They don't have a whole lot laying around to save. So they'll go spend it, and that will be expansionary. Moving money from the rich to the poor tends to be expansionary because the rich have a tendency to be saving that money, and that doesn't stimulate aggregate demand. It doesn't stimulate spending. Moving it to the poor, they go spend it. They don't have a whole lot laying around. And they have a higher propensity to consume. And so that stimulates aggregate demand. Anyway, so it's not 2. So the question is it 3, increase personal income tax rates? You want to raise taxes to help with inflation? Contraction rate takes money out of people's pockets. They don't spend as much, so not as much C. So I like 1 and 3, D. The best part about it, this is the reason I use these review sheets, is they ask question after question about what does fiscal policy do to aggregate demand and aggregate supply? Contraction and expansion. Okay, as the average price level decreases, so that sounds like deflation, or usually we don't actually have deflation, we just have less inflation. But either way, the price level is going down, the purchasing power of people's cash balances increases. This results in an increase in spending. Whoa, all right. And this is the effect that's called, okay, I will just tell you the answer is D. None of these others are anything we talked about in class, other than the idea of Keynesian economics. There may be something called the Keynesian effect, but I don't know what it is. I know what the Laffer curve looks like. We don't need to know it in here. The money illusion effect, I don't think that's a thing. Money is an illusion, but we all share it. So the neutrality of money is a thing that you don't have to know for this class. So it's a real balance effect, but it does remind me to teach you about the real balance effect. So let's review this, because this is actually something that literally, if I was taking the AP test tomorrow, I would have to review this. Because I always forget the name. I know there's 3 reasons the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. There's 3 reasons the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping, and I always forget what they're called. You can see I've already opened my book to cheat out of the book on what they're called. All right, is this an aggregate demand curve? And it's downward sloping because of the income and substitution effects. They might ask you that. So go look those up. This is a regular demand curve, like demand for socks, or demand for haircuts. But they like to do this. They like to trick you, and they'll say, hey, why is the aggregate demand curve downward sloping? And they want you to put income and substitution effects. That's why a regular demand curve is downward sloping. The aggregate demand curve, so let me change this into an aggregate demand curve. Aggregate. Instead of the quantity of just an individual good, we have all GDP. Instead of one single price, we have the whole price level. There. Why is it downward sloping? For 3 reasons. One of them is this, the real balances effect. Okay, I'm going to do this super fast. And so we're trying to explain why lower prices ultimately lead to more GDP. According to this graph, that's what it says. So why is that true? And this is because when, for example, if prices go down, that causes the value of your bank accounts, the balances in your bank accounts, that causes people's, I don't know, account balances to be more valuable. All right, it's not like they just put more money in there, but they really are more valuable. If prices are lower, your $10,000 savings account's worth more. It'll buy you more stuff. And so now all of a sudden, people experience this just surge in wealth, so they're more willing to purchase GDP, to demand stuff. That's the real balance effect. There's 2 other reasons. I had to look up what these were called. One's called the interest rate effect. It's a good name for it. This one involves, you need to know the loanable funds market. This is a great opportunity to review the loanable funds market. The loanable funds market is far more useful than just this. It's useful for crowding out, but another reason why lower price level ultimately leads to more GDP. I guess I'll have to step out of here. When we say people go spend more money, I need to say more consumption. More GDP. Anyway, lower price level. Well, if prices go down, people kind of say to themselves, oh, I don't have to have as much pure money, either cash or checking account, available. Because I used to need $10 to buy my groceries, and now I need $9 to buy my groceries. It's the same stuff, but the prices are low. So people demand, I'm sorry, I don't need loanable funds for this, I just need the market for money. People demand less money, And if we look at the money market, we know it looks like this. Quantity of money, nominal interest rate, demand for money, supply of money. Who set the supply of money voted? The Fed. People demand less money. I know I said never move this curve. This is one weird situation where you would. And that lowers interest rates. And my tattoo says that leads to more investment. This leads to more GDP. That's the interest rate effect. I would not lose a lot of sleep studying this if I were you. I would ignore this, miss the question, and still get a 5. All right. And then the other effect is called, let's go back over here because I'm running out of room. The other effect is called the foreign purchases effect. And this is actually, you need to be able to think through this logic. This is really good logic. If price level goes down in the United States, what country just became a really good deal to buy your stuff in? United States. Because ceteris paribus means all other things stay equal, including the price level in other countries. So people are in Mexico, let's say, are trying to decide, should I buy from the United States or should I buy from Japan or from Germany or from China or whatever? Well, the United States just became a better deal. So this means that foreigners are going to buy more of our exports. Let me do my double integrals here. Which means our net exports is going to go up, which is better GDP. There we go. Anyway, there's the 3 reasons the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. If you forget them right now, you will be just fine. Because it's not something I emphasize, and it's not something AP test emphasizes. Okay. All right, now let's get on to some real stuff. A severe sustained increase in oil prices. When they start talking about energy prices, they're not talking to you demanders. They're talking about, they want you to move supply. It's a supply factor. Oil determines a business's ability to produce whatever they produce and their ability to drive it to the market. Okay? So oil is a supply side factor. Think of it that way. You might think, well, I buy oil sometimes to cook chicken in. Well, that's not what they mean. They mean supply side oil. So a severe sustained increase in oil prices. Is that good for business or bad for business? So what does bad for business do to the short run supply curve? Less. What does it do to the long run supply curve? Less. It's less. It's a more expensive natural resources. It's more expensive land. It's a more expensive input. So, and then what happens to the PPC? Let's review that idea real quick. When the long run average supply curve moves to the, in this case it's moving to the left. If it moves to the right, what do we call that?
Economic growth.
That's economic growth. Good. That's one of our 2 ways of writing it. What's our other way to write economic growth? The PPC moves out. Well, the opposite of this is if the long run average supply curve moves to the left, the PPC moves in. Resources get more expensive. So I put C on this one. All right, let's go to 25. How many are there in this section? 30? A decrease in lump sum personal income taxes will most likely, and don't worry about it if they say lump sum. That just means a big one-time decrease in taxes. A lump sum, it means all at once. A decrease in taxes. All right, so this whole line can be summarized as lower taxes. There we go. That sounds expansionary to me, but let's see what happens. Most likely result in an increase in real GDP because what happens? The government spending decreases to maintain a balanced budget. Does our government do that? No. Well, I'm going to limit anything with a 1 in it because I don't like 1. Cool. Down to 2 choices. Consumption spending increases because disposable income increases. That's what happens, right? When people get a tax cut, they suddenly have more disposable income. More income. Disposable income means after-tax income. More income they get to decide how to dispose of it. More disposable income. Then go spend it. Do they spend it all typically? When you hand somebody $1, do they typically spend all of it? No. What percent do they spend?
MPC.
The MPC. That's what the MPC is. If you got an extra $1 because the government let you keep it by lowering your taxes, how much would you spend? What do they do with the rest? If their MPC is 0.8, they spend 80 cents. What do they do with the other 20 cents? They save it. So that's why this is weaker than government spending, is because the MPC and the MPS are in play. By the way, 2 is the answer. B, 2. Investment spending decreases because disposable income increases. That's not right. All right, let's go to the next one. A rapid increase in successful research and development. Good for business or bad for business? Successful research. That sounds great. All right. So I'm going to move my aggregate supply curves to the right and shift my PPC out. We're smarter. We're better. Better technology. Whatever research and development is. Better humans. All right. Everything moves in. Everything increases and moves out. E. 27. If the marginal propensity to consume, MPC, is 2/3, it's a weird MPC, but I'll buy it. Let's go ahead and write down, if the MPC is 2/3, so 0.67, what's the MPS? The rest, 0.33, and what's the multiplier? What's the spending multiplier? Remember, there's a money multiplier, we're not 2 yet. What's the spending multiplier? 3. 1 over the MPS, which is 1 over 1/3. 1 over 1/3 is 3. Cool. Maybe those will help us. I don't know. I like to write them down immediately because I have them. All right. An increase in income taxes of $100 will result in... Are people going to cut back on their consumption if their tax goes up $100? They will, but not that much. How much are they going to cut back? How much of their C are they going to cut back? 2/3 of it. The rest of their cutback will be a cutback in whatever they used to save. $33. A decrease in autonomous investment. Now we're talking about personal income tax. I'm not even sure what an autonomous investment means. I think it means private investment. I don't like B. I don't recognize B, so I'm going to skip it and I'm going to confidently think, I know stuff. There's something on here I know, I bet. A decrease in consumption of $67 and an increase in savings of $33? I don't like that either. If the government takes away $100 for me, I have to say, oh no, I better cut back somewhere. I'm going to cut back my consumption by 67, but then I'm also going to cut back my savings by 33. I used to save 33 bucks a year. Now I'm going to cut that back. Or I used to save some amount a year, I'm going to cut it back by 33. So I need for both of them to decrease, for D. An increase in government spending of more than $100. Oh, by the way, what's going to happen to GDP? If the multiplier is 3, the government cut taxes contractionary by 100. Do I do 100 times 3? GDP will fall by 300? If that was the question, that would definitely be a choice. That would be a wrong choice. What's wrong with saying $100 tax raise? The government takes away $100. The multiplier is 3, so it cuts GDP by 300. What's wrong with that? Yeah, you're also changing your savings. You only need to multiply the change in your spending. Your spending's, according to our answer here, your spending's only going to change by 67. Your spending's going to drop by 67. That's the only thing that gets multiplied. The formula is change in spending times multiplier is change in GDP. Okay? And I don't even know. That's 191, maybe? 201? 201? It's certainly not 300. I guess it's probably an even 200. So. Either way, an increase in personal income taxes will most... Okay, so this is contractionary again. Which of the following changes in real GDP? So that's contractionary, right? Yeah? Raising taxes. Let me draw a contraction. They want to know what happens to real GDP and price level. I can tell them. I got a graph that tells me that. It's the most important graph in this class. So it's contractionary because people cut back on their consumption. Cut back on their consumption. It's contractionary, so it looks like price level went down. That one. And then GDP decreased too. All right. 29. I hope you're getting tired of the fiscal policy questions. If you are, you've answered enough where you're good at it. I hadn't asked me crowding out yet. One of the reasons the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping is that the value of cash balances decreases, aggregate spending decreases. This is the real balances effect we just went over. 30. If there's a decrease in short-run aggregate supply curve and no change in monetary and fiscal policy are implemented over time. Now, I believe if you look at the answers on the internet, I said actually you can make an argument for a couple of these answers and do just fine. Okay, so this is not a good AP question. If they asked this question on the AP test, I would be upset, but at least we'll think about it. Let's see if we can think about the answer. Maybe there's something about it I'm missing that you'll point out. So GDP, price level, short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, QF. And then there's some kind of decrease in short run aggregate supply, some kind of supply shock that lasts. And so it does look like we're going to move to a new equilibrium price level in GDP. So the question says, are we going to remain there? Nothing wrong with that answer. Yeah, I guess so. No reason not to believe that. You can. We could get out of this situation with government help if they said the government's not doing anything. Are we going to continue to have rising prices and decreasing GDP? Is there any reason to assume that this will continue, like to get even worse? I don't have any reason to say that. So maybe you think that B would be the case. Experience increasing nominal wages. Is people getting paid more? No, they're getting fired. All right. You typically don't get a pay increase when people are getting fired. When GDP's going down, people are losing jobs. Return to the original. I could make a case for this. This could be possible if things worked out right. All right. You could make the case that the fact that we're producing less means less demand for resources, and so eventually resource prices will fall, and cheaper resources makes aggregate supply go back to the right. So maybe they want me to put this, but I don't know. All right. I would rather they have asked you this. This is the most complicated, challenging possible AP question I can think of. If you get it wrong, you can still get a 5. But I would rather they have said, hey, suppose aggregate demand, so pay attention here, I'm going to go fast. This is one of the very last things we did in class. Suppose we're in a nice long run and short run equilibrium. What do you draw if they say you're in long run and short run equilibrium? You need long run and short run aggregate supply. In equilibrium, if you're going to be at both at the same time, you're going to have aggregate demand crosses them both in the same place. So suppose we're at that long run and short run equilibrium. All three lines cross. That's what it means by long run and short run equilibrium. All right? And I want to say, what would happen if aggregate demand suddenly shifted to the left? And what's this called? What's a good name for that? You call that economic problem. I don't say unemployment. What else though? It's a recession, right? Suppose we hit a recession. What will eventually happen? In other words, what are the mechanics of moving to the long run? According to just the shape of my red long run curve, what will eventually happen? Eventually we should go back to full employment, right? There's QF. Eventually we should go back to full employment. Well, why? This is a complicated question. The reason is because, let's see if I can get this right. All right. People start to get fired, right? The price level goes down. So business is not doing well. All right? Well, by the way, if you still have your job, you like this, don't you? You like these low prices. What happens to your, not your nominal wage, the number, let's say the nominal wage you get paid is the same. What happens to your real wage, the value of your paycheck, if you're paying low prices? It's going up, right? You're going, awesome. But eventually your boss is going to come to you and say, look man, we need you to take a pay cut. Why is he asking you to do that? Because A, he's not selling very much. B, he's charging lower prices. And you're probably going to say, okay. Because you're paying lower prices at the store, and there's not a lot of extra jobs out there, so you're not willing to say, I quit. So eventually, nominal wages are going to chase the price level. Didn't we say that in class? Eventually, nominal wages are going to chase the price level down. So the price level fell. In the long run, nominal wages will chase them down. Nominal wages. And that's good for business. Being able to pay your employees left is good for business, and that shifts the aggregate supply curve to the right just enough to get us back to full employment. Price will fall even more, and we'll go back to full employment. What's the other option other than waiting for the long run? Keynes would say in the long run we're all dead. What did Keynes advocate we do instead of wait for the long run? When let's go back to just we went into a recession. What would he say you should do this aggregate demand curve? Government. Put it back. Use expansionary policy and put it back. Put it back with expansionary fiscal policy. Or if he thought the Fed's action would work, he didn't necessarily think they were all that effective for this, but put it back, Fed. All right. I want to get to, what questions have we done? 18? I want to do 7 more before we do. Let's get to 7 or 8 on part 4. Part 4 is about money and monetary policy. One of my favorites. Okay. Remember your M1, M2, M3 definitions of money? The one they tend to ask about is M1. It's the one we're referring to when we say the supply of money, or just money. We mean M1. All right? And that means total cash, total checking accounts. What are the nicknames for checking accounts, though? They might call them checking accounts. They might call them checkable deposits, checking account, and they might call them demand deposits. Number 4? All right. So be on the lookout for lots of different names for the same thing. All right. In fact, this guy put both. Currency and checkable deposits. All right. It's a good idea to go look up the things in M2 and the things in, well, there's only one thing we add for M3. But usually they're going to ask you, hey, what's an M1? Oh, another thing that could be an M1 is traveler's checks. But typically we either we leave that off. But it could be, that counts as M1. All right. What's the distinguishing feature of cash and checking account? Which makes them get to be an M1 and nothing else? How come savings accounts don't get to be an M1? Or large CDs? The things in M1 are the most spendable. They're the easiest to spend. Cash is super easy to spend. Checking accounts also. What's our word for spendability? It's liquidity. The most liquid. Cash and checking accounts. The other thing they might ask you about the M's is they might try to trick you into saying, okay, here's the things in M1. Right there. Is M2 its own separate category of other stuff? No, remember M2 is all the stuff in M1 plus small time deposits, money market mutual funds, just some other stuff, right? They typically don't even ask you what the other stuff is. They just want you to know it's cumulative. All right? Okay, moving on. So what's up?
Are Euro dollars?
I don't know. Euros? I think they just made that up so they'd have a number 4. That might be a thing. I don't know. Okay, it's a legal reserve requirement. So that's the required reserve ratio, but set by the Fed, by the way. It's 25%. Now they're referring to a new, different multiplier. Before, when we said change in spending times the spending multiplier is big change in GDP, we were talking about that process of I spend $1. And whoever I spend it on saves a little bit, spends the rest. And then the next guy saves a little bit, spends the rest. And the next girl saves a little bit, spends the rest. That's the spending multiplier. Spend, 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 spend. The only leakage is saving. This is a different multiplier. This is the multiplier where I deposit $100 in a bank. That bank is required to hold a little back. We don't call that savings. Banks don't save. They hold reserves. But they're required to hold a little back by the Fed, in this case 25%. And then they loan out the other 75%, $75 to somebody who puts it in their bank. That bank has to hold back. And so this multiplier is loan, deposit, loan, deposit, loan, deposit. At every stage, the only leakage is the required reserve ratio. Reserves. So, real quick, the spending multiplier, remember, was 1 over the leakage, 1 over savings, 1 over MPS. This is called the money multiplier or the banking multiplier? The loan, deposit, loan, deposit, loan, deposit. The money multiplier or the banking, both, either one. What's the leakage from this one? Back up. The leakage is the required reserve ratio. So in this one, this is the money multiplier. Money multiplier. In this one, it's 1 over 0.25, which is 4. Don't worry about them calling it the simple deposit expansion multiplier. I guess that's another name. It could be called the money multiplier, the banking multiplier, or the deposit expansion multiplier. But either way, it causes our banks to be able to create money. How does a bank create money? Starts with an L. They loan. Whenever they loan, you still have your checking account that they're loaning, and then the new guy has his money. When money is used, okay, this is a reference to the three uses of money. Medium of exchange, store of value, and unit of account. Medium of exchange means money can be used to buy and sell things. Store of value, or I think here they say standard of value, means store of value means a place you can store your wealth. And then a unit of account, and I don't like the way they call this a standard of value. We should usually call it a unit of account. Unit of account means we also use it to gauge how much stuff is worth versus other stuff. We know a car is worth more than a bicycle because money tells us a car is $20,000 and a bicycle is $200. All right. So I don't like standard of value. Let's say it's a unit of account. All right. So making price comparisons among products is the right answer. But that just gives a good reminder to go over those three functions of money. If something does those three things, it's money. If cigarettes do that in prison, it's money. If gold does that for a society, it's money. It's a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. This guy said standard of value. That's too confusing. All right. 4, which of the following are true statements about the federal fund rate? Whew. So wait a minute. This speaks to a more advanced issue about the tools that the Fed has. So let's remind ourselves what the tools that the Fed has are. All right, do a few more questions and we'll be done. What are the tools of monetary policy? What are the 3 ways the Fed takes the supply of money, quantity of money, nominal interest rate, and either moves it to the right or moves it to the left? All right, the 3 tools. All right. The one they use most often is buy or sell government securities, government bonds, whatever you want to call them. And so this is referred to as open market operations. That's what the AP test will call it, open market operation. So when they say what open market operation, you cannot reference either of these other tools. You got to say buy or sell bonds. This is set by the FOMC, the Federal Open Market Commission. All right. So they can buy or sell bonds. If they want to expand the money supply and move aggregate demand to the right, ultimately, they would buy bonds, because then the money would go out from them and into the banks and get multiplied. If they want to contract the money supply and contract aggregate demand, they would sell bonds. Then the bonds would go out and they would get the money and it would come out of banks, and the multiplier works both ways. All right? That's the main tool. That's the one that's most effective, used most often. All right? Then we have the required reserve ratio we just talked about. If you want banks to be able to make more loans and create more money, cut the required reserve ratio. Then they'll be able to loan more. If you don't want them to, raise it. The other one is the discount rate. And this is what people confuse with the federal funds rate. The discount rate is the idea that if a bank needs a loan, they ask the Fed for the loan. They go to the discount window, which doesn't really exist, and they say, "Hey Fed, can I have a loan?" If the Fed wants to expand the money supply, they make those loans easier to get. They cut the discount rate. They charge banks a lower interest rate on loans, and banks say, "Yes, a low interest rate on loan, I'll go get more money, I'll loan it out to my customers, I'll expand the money supply." If the Fed wants to contract the money supply, they can raise the discount rate. Banks say, "I can't afford to go get a loan from the Fed, I don't have as much reserves to loan out." All right, is any of these a required reserve, or the federal funds rate? No. The federal funds rate is the idea that sometimes, this is not the federal funds rate, but it is the idea that sometimes, let's say their required reserve ratio is 10%. Sometimes banks, they have to meet that every night, and sometimes they don't meet it. Sometimes they only have 9.8% on hand, and they're violating the law, or violating a regulation by the Fed, really. So they borrow from each other overnight, and they charge each other interest. The interest that banks charge each other overnight on little loans so they can meet their required reserve ratio is called the federal funds rate. Don't confuse it with the discount rate. It's one of the number one issues they like to test because they know students mess it up. And it's called the federal funds rate, so you think the Fed charges it. No, banks charge each other. It just so happens those transactions go down at the Fed because all banks have deposits at the Fed. So Is the same thing as the discount rate? No. Is the interest rate banks charge each other? Yes, it's 2. I don't like anything with a 1 in it. I don't like anything without a 2 in it. What about 3? Is influenced by open market operations? That's actually true. Does the Fed set the federal funds rate? Sounds like they should, but do they? No, banks set it. They charge each other that amount of money. But what the Fed does is when they start to adjust the supply of money, what are they really doing? What do they want to change? When they start to adjust the supply of money back and forth, let me get a demand for money curve going here. When they start to adjust the supply of money to the right or to the left, what's happening? They're causing the interest rate to fall, aren't they? What interest rate do they sort of eyeball when they, let's say they're using expansionary policy and buying bonds? What interest rate are they eyeballing saying, we're going to keep doing this until that interest rate gets to where we want it? Until that interest rate falls to where we want it. What interest rate are they eyeballing? Federal funds rate. The one they watch is the federal fund rate. The one they target is the federal funds rate. They don't control it. They just buy those bonds until the federal funds rate drops on its own to where they want it. It's targeted by the Fed. So yeah, it is influenced by open market operations. It's 2 and 3. I'm sorry. Yeah, 2 and 3. All right. We'll get to the end of this page. 3 more questions. Suppose the Fed buys $400,000 worth of securities from anybody. It doesn't matter who they buy it from. They buy it from a person, that person puts that money in the bank. If they buy it from a bank, it's already at the bank. If they buy it from a person and that person buys a bunch of hats, that hat store owner puts it in the bank. Money makes its way to the bank. So this money is going to go to the bank, and this is going to be excess reserves that the bank can loan out, right? Total reserves is all the money they have, right? And they can either hold it as vault cash, or they can keep it on deposit at the Fed. Is that in the money supply if it's in their vault? No. Is it in the money supply if they keep it in the Fed's vault? No. Right. But it says reserves. So total reserves is all the money they have. They only have to keep some of that. If they have any extra, it's called excess reserves. And excess reserves is potential loans, right? Potential money creation, because it's excess. They could loan it if they wanted to. So suppose the Fed buys $400,000 worth of securities, it makes its way to the bank, and it's excess reserves. The required reserve ratio is 20%. What's the multiplier? What's 1 over a fifth? 5. Banks hold no extra reserves. In other words, they're going to loan out all of it every chance they get. What will happen to the total money supply for the system? We'll get that 400,000 excess reserves will all get loaned out and multiplied, and it'll be 2 million, right? 400,000 times 5. Any questions about that one? That's supposed to be an easy one. The money market is definitely in equilibrium when supply meets demand. Where's that one? B. That's a stupid question. All right. And then 7. A commercial bank holds $5,000. Okay, so now we have one bank. This is where you have to keep the distinction between what can the one bank do versus the multiplier process that involves millions of banks in the banking system. So what's going to happen right at the beginning for the first bank, and then what's going to happen in the banking system with the multiplier process. Okay? So we'll have to be careful. Look, single bank, banking system. So the first bank has $500,000 in demand deposit liabilities, meaning they got $5,000 in deposits, right? Liabilities means they owe people that money. The bank owes you your checking account, I agree. All right? They have $120,000 in total reserves. Do they have to keep all that money? I don't know. Let's see what the ratio is. The required reserve ratio is a fifth, 20%. How much do they have to keep if they only have to hold a fifth? Their required reserves, is only 100,000. So how much excess do they have? They're holding 120. Being a little too safe there, aren't they? They could loan out the other 20. So if they have $20,000, they could loan. So which of the following is the maximum amount by which the single bank in the banking system can increase loans? So the first bank is allowed to loan out 20, either B or C. And then it's all going to get multiplied how many times? 20%. So 1 over 20% is 5. It's all going to get multiplied 5 times and be $100,000. All right? Let me qualify the money multiplier one time. What are the 2 things that can slow down the money multiplier, other than the Fed raising it? think about the process. The money multiplier is loan, deposit, loan, deposit. So what if a bank didn't loan all its excess? So in other words, a bank holds some extra. Or what if people didn't deposit? If somebody just takes that cash and says, I'm going to hang on to this as cash, and they hold on to it, then that would slow down the process. Slow down the money multiplier. All right. See you tomorrow.